so we're going to get started. So, welcome to Spartan Series, by the way. We're really glad you're here. My name is Jocelyn, Baird. I was scouting captain of 971 for the 2013 season and the 2014 season. I'm now back as a mentor. So now we're going to get started with the first presentation, Scouting Management and Strategic Techniques. So, for what we're going to cover for this presentation, we're going to look at, first, just a quick overview of scouting, the components of a scouting system, the 971 scouting system specifically. I kind of broke it into looking at quantitative data and then qualitative data, and then also looking at specifically scouting leadership, the position that deals with stands management, the position that deals with the stands to pits communication, and then applying data, and then getting more deep into applying data, Picklisting, 971 style. After that, we're going to talk really briefly about elimination scouting, and then I'm going to go over some leadership and sustainability practices that I found really helpful in my time, and after that, we're going to open it up for questions. So, what is scouting and why does it matter? Always got to start with this. Scouting, in my definition, is the process of observing competition robots in order to collect and apply data for strategic aims. So there's a lot of different types of scouting, pre-scouting, pit scouting. The two types of scouting that I'm going to focus on for this presentation are quantitative competition data and qualitative competition data. This is data that we're in the stands collecting as we watch robots play during a regional or champs. So why does scouting matter? It is relevant in all stages of a competition. So, a typical regional structure, you have the qualification matches where the schedule's randomly generated, alliances of 3 versus 3, depending on how well you do during qualifications, you earn a certain amount of seeding points, those determine how you rank, and your ranking determines in what order you pick alliance partners. During alliance partner selection, then you move to eliminations. So when I say the word pick list, I'm talking about the list that teams who send down a representative to pick an alliance partner are, using to pick their alliance partners. But it's not just about the pick list. It is helpful during every single stage of a competition. And also, seeding, as I mentioned before, what comes out of qualification matches, it doesn't tell a robot's individual story. It tells the story of that robot's qualification match schedule, basically. Seeding is generally pretty reliable for identifying the outliers, those at the really top and the really bottom. For the middle, it gets really random. It's just kind of based on who they get partnered with and who they're against. So you can't trust it for the middle, basically. And also, different types of scouting tell us different things. If you want details, you got to get them yourself. Components of a scouting system. My idea of a good scouting system is one that gathers quality information, organizes it, and applies it strategically. So these 4 components, gathering quality information, organizing, and applying it strategically, I'm going to kind of use these to frame my talk, just as a way to help unpack the 971 system. The 971 scouting system. So this is like a really intense looking flowchart. We're going to unpack this. This is basically what you're looking at now is a representation of what we're doing in the stands during a competition. Each of those colored boxes represents one person. Now, please note that the stands master and runner positions, they can be filled by multiple people. They're just one box on the flowchart. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through each position and kind of add them into the flowchart and see where they all connect. So first we're going to start with gathering quality information. And the 2 types that I'm going to talk about, first I'm just going to point out the positions that they apply to, and then we're going to go in depth. So quantitative data, we have binder scouts, 3 red, 3 blue. They scout the 3 red robots and the 3 blue robots. And they have red binders and blue binders. It's all very color-coded. And then for qualitative observations, we have note scouts, who, there's 3 of them on the flowchart just because that was convenient for the spacing, but really get as many of them as you can is a good way to do it. So now we're going to go in depth into quantitative data. Gathering quantitative data. As I mentioned before, we have our binder scouts, 3 red, 3 blue. They each have a binder, and each binder is filled with data sheets. And so we use 1 data sheet per robot per match. The scout watches the match, they fill out the data sheet. It's like things like recording how many points they scored in auto, how many points they scored in a certain type of goal. They're just recording numerical data. And in terms of quality control, because again, your data is useless if it's not high quality. If you can't trust it, you can't use it. So how do we ensure quality control for collecting quantitative data? We really prioritize training. We have mandatory trainings before every single competition, not just before the first one, every competition. If you want to be at that training, if you want to ride, you are coming, or if you want to be at the competition, you are coming to training. At that training, we like to do a rules quiz, just to make sure that people have read the rule book. And we also like to practice with clips. So what we'll do is I do the whole presentation of like, this is how we scout, this is why we do it, and then we'll give everyone data sheets, and we'll put clips up from like week 0 or week 1 regionals if we can get them, and we just have people practice scouting, and then we talk about it. Another factor for quality control is I like to make how to scout sheets, which are like quick and dirty how-to sheets, or how to scout. And I keep them in the binders, and what I use them for is for backup in case there's a scout who did not manage to get to the mandatory training, or I'm running really low on scouts and I have a very nice parent who's willing to get very quickly trained on how to scout. So it's just a convenient sheet to use as a backup. And also for quality control, engage the scouts. If they've been sitting there for 6 hours straight and no one has talked to them, I mean, your data's going to take a dive in quality. Because, I mean, after a certain amount of time, they're really losing their interest and their attention. So just want to make sure you're consistently engaging your scouts, talking to them, make sure they get breaks, etc. So I mentioned the data sheets. You might wonder what those look like. This is the final data sheet for this past year. I say final because we do go through an iterative process where we start with a data sheet that perhaps collects more information than we want, and then we narrow it down based on what we find being really useful. It's like, we never used that data, let's just stop collecting it. And then you just make a new sheet. So to create the data sheet, you just analyze the game at kickoff, you think about the types of scoring, and you want to be able to collect every single type of scoring until you decide what's relevant. And then you estimate the critical factors. For example, this past game, hanging and gears were super, super critical. So you had to collect that data. You had to really prioritize getting that data. And so yeah, we start broad, then refine. We watch early competitions, week 0, week 1. We think about like, okay, if I'm a scout using this data sheet, does it make sense? Can I follow this? And then after you have your first regional, reflect on the system, talk to scouts, refine your sheet. You're always evolving your system. A possible modification, if you're like kind of worried about getting all the information at once, just start narrow, then expand, maybe collect some basic point scoring and a ranking of driving. A good ranking of driving, I've found, that works well in general and also works well if you have not that many scouts. It's an idea from Citrus Circuits where you rank a robot's driving relative to the other 2 robots on their alliance. So it's a 1 to 3 scale, and you look at an alliance as a whole and you think, okay, my robot that I'm watching, robot XYZ, were they the best driver, the second best driver, or the third best driver? And then you give them a number 1 to 3. And so it allows for ranking relative to other robots, not just based off an arbitrary scale or what that person's concept of what good driving is. And then you do have to prioritize training on what good driving is just so they can have that, comparing ability. But that's also part of training, watching clips, conversations, etc. So organizing quantitative data. We get a lot of it. We want to be well organized. The data sheets, so every note scout is filling out 1 sheet per robot per match. They pass it to the data entry person, the purple box, and they have a laptop. And their job is they sit there and they enter data into a laptop. They are true champions. They just sit there entering numbers. And we have this custom program. It's just like a simple Python program. It just basically has boxes for each point of data, and you just type them in, hit submit, it goes off into our data sorting thingy. So when you're making a custom program, you want to consider what you want to have quick access to. Like when you're in a regional, you're about to have a match, you want to brief your drive team on some important stuff like, hey, this upcoming alliance that you're playing against, they're really strong at putting up these kinds of points or something. You want to know what you're going to want to have access to during a competition. You want to think about the variables you're going to want to compare. There's Boolean variables, which are the yes or no variables, like did they hang? Yes or no. There's no in between. They don't get, points for partial hanging. And there's also numerical variables, like a ranking scale, 1 to 3 driving, or, how many points they put up. So you have to deal with those a little bit differently. Prioritize simplicity, just in general, prioritize simplicity, and really, really prioritize offline storage. You cannot rely on Wi-Fi at an event. I know it's tempting, you can't do it. This is just some screenshots of our program. You can see it's very simple, and you can click on any team, a lineup, see the data was cleared after our last regional, but it would have their average data for various variables. Those are some notes. The notes wouldn't be in there normally, but they until later. They get synced from the notes laptop, which I'll talk about in a minute. But you can just see that's sort of what we're able to look at whenever we want. Another more screenshots that would have the average data for every variable, and you can sort by any variable, which is very helpful for comparing, like, okay, who's the best gear runner, who's the best shooter, blah, blah, blah. You don't just say, like, who's the best in general. You want to look at it variable by variable. And that's just a list of all the teams, how you can click on any team and see a profile of that team. So now let's move on to qualitative data. Gathering qualitative data. We use the note scouts, as I mentioned before. They have notebooks. They either pick or they're assigned to the robot to follow, and they're basically looking for the information that numerical data doesn't tell you. The story of the robot that the data won't tell you. And this could be something like, say a robot who is putting up 0 gears because they've spent the entire match playing wiki defense. If you just look at their data, it's going to say that they're really not scoring a lot of points. It's like, okay, well, this robot's useless. But if you have a note scout watching them, they'll see, hey, this robot's playing really intelligent defense. They're fast, they're agile, they're really in tune with their alliance partners. Like, they're a very desirable alliance partner. So the note scouts are there to make sure that we don't miss stellar robots because their numbers don't necessarily reflect the quality of their abilities. So how do we ensure quality control for the note scouts? We handpick the people. It's generally people who started out as binder scouts and they were making really insightful comments, or they were just genuinely interested. They were consistently showing up. Some basic aspects of like, hey, they might be good to move up into scouting leadership. They go through the same training. They also go through some extra training where we watch clips and we just talk robots. I cannot overemphasize how important just talking robots is for training scouts. You want to put up clips of driving and ask people for comments. Be like, hey, what'd you think of robot XYZ's driving? And you want to expand their thoughts and model the kind of language you want them to be using as note scouts. And that language is subjective statements backed up by specific observational evidence. Because that's kind of the iffy thing with note scouts, is that we are doing subjective statements. Like, their driving was good. Their driving was, disorganized. Like, what does that mean? I can't use that as data if I don't know what it means. In order to show me what it means, I need people to use specific observational evidence. So if someone says like, oh, their driving was bad, I might be like, okay, great, tell me more about that. What about their driving told you that it was bad? Then they expand their thoughts. They're like, well, they're really slow getting across the field. They spun in circles for 5 seconds, and then they hit the wall. Those specific observational evidence that makes a subjective statement something I can actually use. So the more that you model that, the more it'll become second nature, And also for quality control, collaboration. Really got to prioritize collaboration. Just a note, back to the quantitative data, the binder scouts, that can be done in isolation, assuming good training. You can just have one person, they know how to scout, they've got their binder, they're handing in sheets. It's probably not the most fun, but it can be done in isolation. Qualitative data should not be gathered in isolation. It should be gathered collaboratively. Because you want to be able to check work, you want to be able to talk robots. Be like, hey, did you see that crazy defensive move? Like, that was so smart, I'm so impressed. They're like, yeah, like they really, pinned that robot or whatever. It helps check work. It helps clarify terms. What I mean by that is a lot of times when note scouts are taking notes, they'll start using like little terms that mean something to them, like janky. It's like, okay, to us that means that the robot might not be very well constructed, maybe there's things falling off, but to someone else it might mean that they don't have an organized plan of where they want to go on the field. By collaborating, you need to make sure that when a note scout is using a term as specific observational evidence, then everyone is on the same page with what it means. And if you do it in isolation, it's pretty easy for people to go off on tangents of slang. Also, for quality control, we do verbal reporting. They have to verbally report to the typist who is typing in their notes. And we find that really helpful just for that extra layer of processing. When you have to write the notes and then verbally report it, it helps people, it just helps them phrase their thoughts in a new way that they might not have been able to otherwise. So organizing qualitative data. We have another custom program, again, simple Python thing. Syncs, it's on a separate laptop that can sync to the other laptop. We've got the typist in the purple, who is just, they're a champ, they sit there typing notes. And then in terms of how a lead scout might organize qualitative data, one thing that I liked doing was I had team pages where I would have a half sheet for every team and their robot. I would try to have a picture of their robot because that's really helpful for me, visual cues. And I would put personal notes on there if there's like a recurring theme coming up with my note scouts, like, their driving is super fast but not well controlled, then I might write that down. But that's just my personal way of organizing it. Really, whatever works for you, There's just some screenshots of our program.
So can you go back to that page? Just a quick question. So there's one of those sheets.
One of those sheets per team.
So notes are taken on this sheet as those teams are up and as they're.
Yeah, these sheets are what the lead scout would be their personal notes. The note program is a separate thing that is used to then inform those. But like the note program, all the scouts are contributing to. The half sheets, only the lead scout is contributing to. And that was just my personal way of organizing it. There's definitely many different ways that you can do it, just whatever makes sense for you. So checkpoint real quick on the presentation. At this point, we have covered the gathering and organization of quality data of the quantitative and qualitative variety. So that's where we're at in the flowchart. It's almost filled out, and we are going to move on to scouting leadership. So the first position I'm going to talk about is the stands master. Now, please keep in mind that this position does not necessarily have to be one person. When I ran scouting, it was one person just because we didn't have that many people. But if you have the luxury of a lot of people that are very engaged, then heck yeah, have multiple people doing it. The more people you get engaged in scouting, the better. So stands master, they are managing stands logistics. That's basic things like material, making sure everyone's got their binders, that they're sitting in the right places. Like, oh no, Johnny dropped his pencil and now he needs another one. Like things like that. Behavior, making sure people are paying attention, acting professional, representing the team. And they look at data quality control. They kind of take stock of what's coming in, make sure it makes sense. They're also assigning special data collection missions. I'll talk more about why and how we do this later, but basically it's things like they'll go to the note scout and say, hey, Team XYZ is in the next match, tell me how well they drive under defense. We want to know very specific things about the robot, and they prompt their note scouts to pay attention to those things and then report back. They encourage robot talk. As I said, that's one of the best ways I know of to engage scouts, and they are also editing the pick list at the time on Saturday, the second day when we actually have pick list. And I'll talk about the picklisting process in another segment. So then the runner. This is what I was during my tenure as scouting captain, but again, it doesn't have to be one person. We just didn't have a lot of people. The runner, they prepare and deliver match briefs for the drive team. That's the primary, well, not the primary, but one of the biggest goals. So what this means is that before every match, I would look at a lineup and I would say, okay, our upcoming allies are these two teams. Our upcoming opponents are these three teams. And then I would take stock of strengths and weaknesses, like strategy things we need to know, like, this robot, they only inbound from over here, or they're a really wide robot, it's really easy to block them if you get up and so they can't turn, or something like that. Little tips and tricks for the drive team. Then I would go down to the drive team, brief them, and then we would go meet with the allies and come up with our match strategy. And basically the runner is really working on the pit to stand communication. So they are curating the data collection and reports based on what the drive team wants, because as the event goes on, you'll find like maybe the drive team's like, oh, we really need to know where our allies start during autonomous. That's super important. We might not have been collecting that data because maybe we didn't know that they needed that. So then we'll go and say, hey, scouts, we need you to now collect this. And they'll report back to the drive team, and it's this whole cycle of making sure that everyone is getting their information needs met for strategic gain. We also deliver constructive feedback to the drive team, so I might go to the drive team and be like, hey, in that last match, like you got a lot of time, you wasted a lot of time being stuck in that corner getting defended. I would recommend you avoid that corner, cut around this way. Like little things like that, just from scouting our own drive team and seeing how they can improve. We also update the stands on the robot. Like if the robot dies, the stands want to know why. It's their robot. So just making sure that everyone in the stands is in the loop with what's going on in the pit. That's a really, really old match briefing that I gave the drive team in like 2012. I couldn't find any more recent ones. They got better and less on a sticky note as the years went by, but that's kind of the basic concept. It doesn't have to be fancy. You just write down the teams and put good information. So, checkpoint. At this point, we have covered every position in the 971 scouting system. We have partially addressed applying data when we talked about the runner position, but we're going to go more in depth into that in a second. I just want to make a quick note note on dealing with the lack of scouts. This is an issue near and dear to my heart because when I took over the scouting program, I really struggled to get anybody to fill seats. So here's a couple of basic strategies. Bail on scouting less relevant robots. What I mean by that is you want to focus on robots you don't know a lot about. The robots that are really good and the robots that are really not good, you kind of already know what you need to know about them. Like, you don't need to count every single point that the top ranked team is scoring. You know it's going to be a lot. It's not really going to help you make any significant decisions. You want to focus on the mid-ranked robots, the robots for whom seeding gets quite random, because those are the robots that you don't know a lot about and that you have no way of finding out about without direct observation. The match schedule is your friend. If you only have, 4 scouts, then look at the match schedule and pick the 4 teams that you know the least about, have them scout those. Just bail on the other 2. You can adjust how you collect information, collect less information, collect in a more holistic manner, use the 1 to 3 driving scale so you can have one person perhaps scouting an entire alliance to look at their driving. There's a lot of creative ways you can do it. You can also ask parents nicely if they would like to scout for you. I wouldn't recommend relying on this strategy, but I have used it, and it did get me out of a couple tough spots with needing data, and that's where the how to scout sheet comes in handy. So applying information. A big way to apply information is with the pick list. That's going to be a whole separate topic. So first we're going to talk about match strategy. I already kind of talked about how the runner, they'll give the drive team feedback. And just kind of to go more in depth into that, we use our scouting information to plan the flow of action with our allies. It's like, hey, Team A, you're gonna be the gear runner. Team B, you're gonna be shooting. Team C, you are going to be playing defense on this opponent. Making sure that we go into the match with a clear plan. And so we can play to the strengths of our allies. Like, maybe they don't have any mechanisms. That's okay, but if they have a solid drive pace and they can drive, we want them on defense. And it allows us to address the strengths and weaknesses of our competition. Don't assume your allies know. You don't know what kind of scouting they're doing. Ask them, see what information that they can share. But in terms of letting them know about the weaknesses of your opponents, like say, hey, this robot, they're really defendable if you get them at this angle or something. Don't assume they know that. Share it with them. It'll help the entire alliance. You can also use it for alliance partner robot repairs. What I mean by that is that you might take a note like, oh, Team XYZ, their hangar just broke clean off. And geez, that's a bummer for them. But we're playing with them in 4 matches, so let's send someone over and say, hey, would you like help repairing your hangar? It helps the upcoming match, and it's also just nice sending somebody over to, see if they want a hand fixing something. That's something that must be done well in advance, if at all, but it is something to consider. So, how to make a pick list, 971 style. I'm going to discuss a pick list within the context of a basic regional, Friday all qualifications, Saturday partial qualifications, alliance selection, then eliminations. Champs would be slightly different, more just an expanded way of doing it. So pick listing. The goal of pick listing is to get a list of at least 24 teams in rank order of who you think you can form the best alliance with. The reason for the 24 is because the teams that go to elimination is going to be 8 teams of 3 robots each, so 24. So if you have 24 robots on your list, you won't run out of robots to pick if you are up there picking. Just a note on pick listing, you really want to prioritize involving new scouts in this process because it is very hard to teach. In my opinion, creating a pick list lies at the intersection of data and intuition, and sometimes last-second panic. So it's not the kind of thing that you can just give someone a bullet point list of how to do it and expect them to feel successful. It's something that is learned gradually through involvement. And just a note on 971, we get the most use out of our quantitative data for initial sorts, just kind of seeing the rough categories of who's putting up the most points and who's got the best driving and that kind of thing. For the fine-tuning sorting within those broader categories, we rely a lot on qualitative comments. That's sort of just a characteristic of our system, how we've gotten used to doing it. Other teams are successful doing it other ways, but this is what I know. Assuming we've had qualifications all day, and robots have seeded, they've earned a certain amount of seeding points, etc. So we all gather in a hotel room or a room or something, depending on where we are. And we start by note picking. Well, actually, first we sync the data from our notes laptop to our quantitative data laptop so we can look at it all in one place. And we start by note picking. The way that we do that is we sort by driving rank, and then we go to the bottom, the lowest rank, and we go upwards and we talk about each team. And what we're doing in this process is we are looking for teams who are either completely non-functional or they cannot drive well enough to accomplish basic objectives. The reason we're doing this is because we're only going to put 24 teams on the pick list, There's often 50, 60 teams that are regional. You can afford to just cross some of them off the list if it's really, really clear that you're not going to pick them. And so this shrinks the cohort that you then have to put a lot of energy into sorting. So after that, we start sorting by crucial variables. So we take all of our data and we'll usually we sort by driving first, and then the variables that are crucial for that exact game, for example, this past year, climbing and gears. So we'll start by driving. We'll get a kind of a general idea of who's, floating towards the top third, the middle third, the bottom third. We'll just kind of get a general idea of where teams are falling. Sort by different variables, look at if teams are still in the same areas. We kind of just basically want to sort teams into 3 basic groups. Top third, middle third, bottom third. One note about variables that 971 sorts by, we often also sort by defense because we, a very basic, kind of the standard setup for an Eliminations alliance is 2 offensive robots, 1 defensive robot. 971 is usually an offensive robot, so we are often looking for a defensive robot to help complete our alliance. That might not be what your team is looking for if you want to sort by the variables that complement your strategy. So you sort teams into 3 groups, and then what we do is we go through and we talk about each one. Say, okay, hey, Team XYZ, what do we think? And we just toss comments out, like, oh, their driving was amazing, or like, they really haven't been putting up a lot of points recently, or just those qualitative comments that people have been noticing. And we will look at the notes that are on the computer, we'll look at the data, we'll just talk about it. And what I like to do is if I have those half sheets that I pointed out that were only for the lead scout use, we can use those to you have the pictures, it'll visually cue you, and you can physically sort them, which I find really helpful for kinesthetic learners, but you can do it all on the laptop if you want to, just sort of what works for you. So through talking about each of them, we create an ordered list, which is the draft of our pick list. We have 24-ish potential alliance partners in rank order. But then we also create a second list. The second list is a list of gaps in our data, which might be things like, I held up the sheet for Team XYZ. I'm like, okay, XYZ, what do we think? And there's silence. Like, I don't know what their driving's like. Or, hey, aren't they broken? Did they get fixed? Like, I don't know. Any of those questions you make a note of, and you find the match schedule, and you make a note of when that team is playing, if they're playing the next day. And you want to make sure that you have a note to get your note scouts to watch that team to answer that specific question. Like, watch Team XYZ, tell me if their hangar's still broken. Watch Team XYZ, tell me if they drive well under defense. Fill in gaps in data. So Saturday qualifications. The note scouts, as I just mentioned, they're filling in gaps in data. This is managed by the Stance Master, and we continue binder scouting. The more recent quantitative data is more important, but you don't want to discount the overall trends. This is just to catch things like, Team XYZ, they fixed their shooter overnight and now they're putting up crazy points. Like, that's a big difference. That would change your opinion of where they should lie on your pick list. But you also really want to value consistency. So we edit the pick list. The pick list is kept private between the top, 3 or 4 scouts for strategic reasons and professional reasons. So the lead scouts, they're moving teams up and down as data comes in. Like, maybe they'll watch a team who we didn't know a lot about. We watched their match and they were on fire. So we're like, oh my god, that team has to move up. And so what I have on the made up letters to represent teams, that's an example of how I would sort a pick list. It's just kind of what worked for me. I'd be like, oh wow, Team BAC, that last match was insane. I'm going to put them above Team AAC. And then I'll just do drafts and copy it over and adjust it as necessary. But again, whatever works for you. If you want to do it all on the computer, it's up to you. At this point, another note on if you're short on scouts, bail on scouting no picks, bail on binder scouting. We keep binder scouting because we have the luxury of enough people to do it, but if you are working with not that many scouts, you really want to focus on the qualitative information. At least that's our philosophy. is to really focus on the qualitative information to fill in gaps in data and help you fine-tune the order within broader categories of top third, middle third, bottom third. Saturday alliance selection. So before the alliance selection, you have to finalize the pick list. And at this point, you designate a representative who is going to go down to the floor if you are one of the top 8 seeds or if you get called up. And this should be an experienced scout, but not the pick list expert. And they should have a copy of the final pick list. The reason that you pick an experienced scout, but not the pick list expert, is because the pick list expert is going to be on the sidelines as the picking is happening, and they're going to be rapidly conferring as things happen and potentially making last-second changes. So I would always go up as the representative because I was the runner, I was a very experienced scout, but I was not the person who was always like editing and fine-tuning the pick list. I was not the pick list expert. So I would get sent up with a list of 24 teams. As teams get picked, cross them off, say they're no longer available, and then when it comes time for me to pick, I look at the team that is basically the highest ranked team still available on my list, but then I look into the crowd. And in the crowd, there's the pick list experts who have been conferring with other top scouts. Potentially, they've been conferring with with our other alliance partner, depending on how organized that is. And they hold up a whiteboard, and the whiteboard has a team. And I defer to that whiteboard because they might have made last-second changes, like 2 teams that we didn't expect to get together, got together, now it changed the whole strategy needs. So I defer to that, but I have the pick list just in case something happens with the whiteboard and they can't hold it up so that we're not left standing there awkwardly until we end up picking whatever team cheers loudest. A note on the whiteboard, don't do it early. It's just that could get awkward with someone else taking your pick. So at this point, hooray, you have an alliance. Now a lot of people think that after the alliances are selected, scouting is over. Not true, at least not for us. We do elimination scouting. So we're just going to do a brief overview of that, because we find it really helpful. So Saturday, eliminations, bail on binder scouting. You don't need it anymore. Now we're focusing just on note scouting. We are note scouting other alliances. The basic goal for note scouting another alliance during eliminations is you want to get their sequence of actions. You want to know who tends to be in what spot when and who is engaging with who when. For example, for 2014 aerial assist, when there was robots that tended to inbound the ball, pass the ball, shoot the ball, we would say, okay, Robot A inbounds the ball, usually from this side of the field, passes it to Robot B at about two-thirds of the way up the field, then Robot B passes it to Robot C goes over here and shoots. They cannot shoot from over here, they always shoot from here. You want to be able to sort of do the draw a little square for the robot, arrows to where they go, the kind of game plan. And this really helps the drive team to know where their opponents are going to be, and so that they can plan with their allies for where they should be. So you're looking at the drive patterns, you're looking at the offensive and defensive roles, like, okay, these are the 2 main shooter bots, but this bot is playing heavy defense, they're probably going to target our bot for heavy defense, so we're going to make a plan to get around that. You look at their strengths and weaknesses, like maybe, Robot A, they can only shoot if they're lined up just right, so if you just keep bumping them with defense, they can't get lined up well enough to shoot. Or, Robot B, they're really wide, they can't turn if they're in a certain position, so just park yourself there and then they can't turn. Basically, you're just culminating all of your understanding of these robots, and as you're watching them play as an alliance, into doing the best you can to advise your drive team. And then, of course, after the first match, you advise your drive team on how they did, constructive criticism, etc. Basically, doing everything you can, getting every last scrap of useful information out of that data to try and help you move the furthest forward through eliminations. So just to talk about some leadership and sustainability practices. These are just, a lot of the basic leadership lessons apply here. I just kind of wanted to focus on leadership and sustainability practices that I have personally found very relevant through my tenure as running scouting and also as a mentor for scouting. So first, just for developing a system. Scouting begins at kickoff. For some teams, scouting begins 3 days before the competition when they realize, oh geez, we never actually figured out how to do scouting, let's just start on that right now. Which, if if that's where you're at, that's where you're at. But in terms of developing a scouting system, we like to have scouting begin at kickoff with analyzing the game, thinking about how things are going to be scored, what's going to be critical, developing the data sheets, all of that. You want to create a really clear structure. If you don't have one, you want to create one. If you already have one, you want to go through your structure and ask yourself, how can I make this better? Ask your team, how can I make this better? You want to address the objectives of gathering, organizing, and applying quality data. And do this, start simple and realistic. If having like 8 people in the stands at all times and 2 laptops and 2 separate people typing things is not realistic for the size and bandwidth of your team, that's okay. You can do all paper scouting. You can collect less information. You can do all phone scouting if you feel like that is better for your team. That's okay. Do whatever you need to do to gather, organize, and apply quality data. You can always start simple, get a feel for what works, and then evolve your system for the next competition, the next season, the next everything. You're always getting better. So yeah, you're developing your system throughout build season and early regionals. I really, really recommend developing your system during build season and then testing it with week 0 and week 1 regionals, because you do not want to be at your first regional the first time that you realize there is a bug in your program, or there's a bottleneck in how scouts fill out their data sheets, or that you are not collecting certain data that turns out to be super critical for strategy. You don't want to find that out at your first regional. It also is an excellent training opportunity to have scouts practice running through the system with week 0, week 1 regionals, assuming you can get a live stream. But there's usually at least a couple available of questionable quality, but they're there. So for management, I find that it's really, really important to have a transparent process, because a lot of scouts I have found, especially if they're binder scouts, they're sitting in the stands all day, they've got a sheet, they're filling out a data sheet, they're watching a robot, they're handing it in, they're filling out another sheet, they're handing it in, and then it seems like these sheets get spirited away, and then sometime later there's an alliance. It's like the whole middle portion, it's just it seems inaccessible to them. And I don't think that's okay, because if scouts don't know how their data is being used, what's their motivation to take good data? It just kind of seems like I'm doing this job, it's kind of tedious sometimes, and then something happens, boom, alliance. You want to show scouts the value of their data. You want to show them exactly how and why what they are doing matters. So what I like to do is I would take scouts on field trips. So we would have our binder scouts in the stands, and whoever was due for a break or something, when I was going to go brief the drive team, I would take that scout with me. And I'd say, hey, let's go brief the drive team. And I would show them exactly how I look at the data they've been collecting, I pull relevant information, I create my match briefing, I go down to the drive team, bring my scout with me, we talk to the drive team, we say, hey, here's the awesome data my scouts have been collecting, it's telling you this. We go over to the alliance, to our allies, we talk strategy with them, basically engaging the scout and showing them what they do matters. And it's fun, and then they kind of get an idea of the bigger picture of the system. You don't want them to feel like they're an isolated cog in some mysterious machine. Also, our scouting meetings are semi-open. What I mean by that is that, our Friday night meeting when we're getting our pick list drafted, the first half of it is open to the entire team with the caveat that if you're disruptive, we will ask you to leave. And during that time, we go through hey, this is kind of where we're at with the competition. This is the kind of alliance partner we're looking for. This is our general strategy. We just kind of update the team, and we let them know what scouting has been doing during this time. And that's a good time for new people to come, and they get an understanding of what scouting does, and they feel connected to the team, to the overall goal. We do the second half of the really fine-tuning the pick list. We confine that to just the top scouts, because it's really hard to have an in-depth conversation with an entire team, and it's not really fair to say that only some people can stay and some people can't. So we just try to make sure that we have as much of the meeting open as possible. We also, as I mentioned before, prioritize training. Training is really, really important for us. And So the mandatory training before every regional is very much mandatory. I'll personally invite scouts, like, hey, you're coming to the mandatory training, right? Saw you signed up for SVR, hope to see you at the training. Make sure that they really know that. This allows you to be proactive, not reactive, about setting your expectations. So you're proactive about setting your expectations of how they're going to pave the stands, what kind of data they're going to collect, how they're going to scout, and you are not reactive to situations like you get there and you realize half your scouts didn't attend training, or half your scouts are taking bathroom breaks and never coming back, or issues that you do not have time to deal with when you are running scouting during a regional. You don't have time for that. So you need to front load the effort of getting scouts on the same page and plugged into the operation before you get there. And also model professionalism. I mean, talk the talk, walk the walk. At every point during a regional, heck, at every point during a regional weekend, you are representing your team. And if you want your scouts to act as professionally as they need to be acting, you need to be modeling that. Talk about it in training, talk about what is and is not acceptable stands behavior, but just make sure that you're always setting a good example and that you do not tolerate unprofessional behavior. And just a general note on management, celebrate scouting as a fully fledged division of the team. Sometimes it gets a stereotype of this kind of drudge work that we toss the new students on because we don't know what else to do with them. I want you to challenge that stereotype. I want you to help people understand why scouting is an in-depth and interesting process that you can do a lot with and adds an incredible amount of value to a team, just in terms of running their whole system, strategic advances, and being more connected to the FRC community. I want scouts to know that their contributions are valued, that them sitting in the stands all day taking data is worthwhile and it's worth working hard at because we are proud of them for what they contribute to the team. Final note on sustainability. This is another issue near and dear to my heart because when I took over the scouting system for 971, it was just sort of a you're in charge of scouting, now bye kind of thing. And I had to start from scratch, which was, in some ways good because I could start from scratch, do new things, but it was also very tough. So just a note on sustainability. Really prioritize engaging new people. I know I've kind of been mentioning that throughout, getting into kind of the meetings, talk to them, etc., but I really cannot overstate it. Personal invitations, those go a long way. If you say, hey, I really liked the comments you're making about, this robot, would you like to come to the scouting meeting? That is a great way to get people involved. People want to feel wanted. People want to feel like they've been noticed for their hard work and that they're appreciated. That tiny action makes a huge difference between someone staying on the fringes and someone getting involved and perhaps being then tapped for leadership. Do a presentation to the team about what scouting is, why we do it, this is how to get involved. Conversation is key. Always be talking robots. Talk to new people. Say, hey, what'd you think of the regional? What did you like scouting? What was that like for you? What was tough? What was cool? Just talk to people. Practice reflection. After every competition, do a debrief with your scouting team. Talk about what went well with your system, what didn't. For example, where were bottlenecks? Was your data sheet good? Were we getting the right data that we needed for various strategies? Seek feedback from your scouts, from your drive team, from anybody who's relevant. Just seek feedback. And improve the system. You are always improving. Also documentation. This is just sort of a good team practice in general. Documentation helps you, it helps the team. It helps you process, maybe after a competition you do a debrief, write up some notes. That helps you process, and it also helps future leaders of scouting think about, oh, hey, they ran into this problem too, and this is how they dealt with it. And it also acts as a backup store of knowledge, because the thing is, it doesn't matter how great your system is for one season. If you graduate and you take your knowledge with you, then it's back to square one. So if you want to have a sustainable system, you need to train a successor and document and engage new people and get people excited about scouting. Because if you want to make a real difference for your team, you don't want scouting to be exceptional just for one season. You want scouting to be exceptional for the program. Thank you.
When you're scouting the stands, how does battery life there?
We have a car battery and an inverter. Good question. Regarding going completely digital. So we do a paper to laptop system, which is kind of unusual. Most teams either do all paper or they do all digital. The reason we have stuck with that is A, it's really easy because the program is super simple, Python. I think a middle schooler programmed your last one, actually. Anyway, pretty easy to program, and the paper is easy to deal with. But the main reason that we do that is because we have found that the act of writing on a piece of paper gets us better data. There's something about humans where, there's been studies done where if you handwrite your notes, you process more. We have found that handwriting on data sheets helps scouts get better data. Also, if they're on phones, it's really, really distracting. Even if they don't have like other stuff on the phones. I mean, you know how the average high schooler is with a phone. It's easy for people to kind of get off on tangents. But another reason is that in case something were to happen, we have a backup paper system. But mostly we do it because it's easy, it works for us, it's very easy to change, and because we find that we get better data. And we don't have to deal with like glitchiness or cell service or trying to figure out how to write a phone app versus just a basic Python thing. But I do know that other teams are very successful with going all digital, so it's just sort of a team preference.
So Team 971 has been very successful in the last several years.
Mm-hmm.
So I can see the motivation for the scout. They can see why it's useful. Not all of our teams have been so successful in recent years, and scouts tend to feel like, oh, well, we're scouting, but we don't really want to be doing this. What's the use?
Yeah.
So what words of wisdom can you give us to those of us who are in that, probably that middle tier rather than being one of the top tier?
I would say, so scouting is relevant in all stages of the competition for every team. I know that's, like you could say that, but how do you get a scout to believe it, right? So I would say really emphasize the role of scouting in developing match strategy, because even if you don't see your team ending up as a top 8 seeded alliance, you can still win more matches by scouting. Because then you can brief your drive team, go into a match better prepared, have a better idea of what is working for your strategy, what is not. I would also recommend, if you're dealing with a motivation problem with your scouts, have them focus on qualitative scouting. Because really, if we're ending up in the middle tier, then having all those quantitative numbers and being able to run, compare every single variable to everything else, it's not as relevant if you're not in as strong of a picking position. But having good data on how other teams play the game, understanding their basic sequence of actions, what they usually do first, where they usually shoot from, and understanding who is driving well. And that means, are they fast? Are they agile? Something that I would talk about, I wish I had a clip, is we would watch a robot and we would think, do they know where they're going to be in 2 seconds? Or are they just kind of driving around, doing their best to avoid things? We want robots who are occupying space intelligently. Like they see one robot coming over here, they're heading that way. They're gonna head them off. You want to be able to evaluate that kind of qualitative qualities, because, and that's honestly, that's a lot more fun to scout, realistically, because you're talking robots, So I would say if you're dealing with a motivation problem, you could bail on a lot of quantitative scouting and focus on qualitative, and focus on finding robots who complement your strategy, and focus on really critically evaluating your own strategy. Talking to your drive team after every match, say, hey, this went well, this didn't go well. Let's talk about it. Does that answer your question, or?
During a competition.
How much we look for what?
Improvement during a competition.
It kind of depends. So there's improvement in the sense of, their mechanism was broken and now it's fixed, and that makes a huge difference in terms of they can shoot now or something like that. That would make a big difference. We also look for improvement. I say the hardest improvement to gauge is improvement in driving, Because, I mean, say you're at a regional, it could be that the driver's first time driving the robot. And they could dramatically improve over the course of the regional as they get more comfortable, as they get to understand, how the robot works, etc. So we do place slightly higher value on more recent information. We also place high value on the value of consistency, because if a robot is really good sometimes, but really bad sometimes, you don't really want to take that chance, unless you're in kind of a Hail Mary position. So I guess the answer is yes, we do look at improvement. We do keep an eye on robots that we think have the potential to improve, to bump them out of one category and into another. But we also really value consistency. So in order for them to really make a big difference, the improvement has to be quite significant.
How many people do you typically have at community conferences scouting?
Okay, so the question is, how many people do we typically have scouting? We typically have 3 people with red binders scouting the Red Alliance, 3 people with blue binders scouting the Blue Alliance. We have 2 people who each have a laptop and they're just doing data entry. We generally have, it kind of depends on the year. This year, in the past couple of years, we've had a lot of students. We've had a lot more note scouts just because we have the luxury of more people in the stands who are willing to get trained and, want to contribute to the team. So we've had up to like 5 or 6 note scouts. And there have been times, like this past year, the runner position, that was filled by about 3 different people who would do different aspects of briefing the drive team or collecting data. The stands master, I think, was typically usually 1 or 2. So I guess we try to run with a minimum of, I guess that's 13 people. Minimum 13 people, but we've had up to like 20 involved. But we also have the luxury of having a lot of people involved. So if you don't have as many people, there are ways to modify it so that you don't need a minimum of 12. All right, well, thank you for coming. I really appreciate it.
We are 971.